Hey, beautiful, please consider subscribing to our channel if you've been enjoying these stories. Your support helps a lot. Aid us in reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Under the pale violet sky of Revelis 3, the jungle whispered with danger. Sharp leaves hissed in the wind, while the roots underfoot seemed to pulse like veins. The air was thick with spores and chemical heat, and death clung to everything like a second skin. Tahran moved carefully. His feet silent in the undergrowth, the others followed, 2 steps behind spears, raised eyes alert for movement. They were 5 in the hunting party, armed with stone-tipped weapons and dressed in tight-wrapped, high to guard against the burning mists of dawn. The Zalvi were a people of tradition, muscle memory and ancestral memory, but today something pulled Tahran toward the northern ridge. Something beyond instinct, something strange. They found it half buried. In the twisted wreckage of trees, a smoking husk that had once been silver and graceful. It was scorched, now gouged and bleeding sparks like a wounded beast. A machine, said Vekar, spitting and raising his spear. Federation, probably, or maybe the Red. March pirates, either way, not our fight. We should go before whatever it carried gets up. Tahran stepped closer, ignoring him. The thing was clearly a drop pod, compact and fast built, for emergency planetary re-entry, only one hatch on the side. Partly. Open bent at the hinge. A smell of blood and metal and smoke drifted from within. He's alive, Tahran said. Kneeling beside the hatch, peering in eyes, adjusting to the dim Vekar cursed, and moved to drag him back, but stopped when he saw the look in. Tahran's eyes and the shape inside the pod human. The word held weight. It was both myth and memory to the Zalvi, a name carried through fireside tales and scattered radio signals. Humanity, the destroyer and the wanderer, the strange ape-kin that burned across the stars with fire and thought. The human inside the pod was tall, even slumped against the inner wall, his skin pale under bruises. His right arm hung at a wrong angle, and blood had soaked through the uniform that clung to his side. One eye was swollen shut. The other opened at their presence, barely tracking them. He said something soft. A whisper. Help. Vekar made the sign for danger, drawing a line across his chest, then turned to the others, his voice low and angry. This is death. We carry. If we take him back, they will come looking, and when they do, they will not care that we offered kindness, only that we saw too much. Tahran looked at the human again, at the lines of pain carved into the face and the broken helplessness of his limbs. He felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, not duty, something older. He's not a weapon, he's wounded, he's alone. If he dies here, it will not be justice. Only silence. Vekar's jaw tightened, and he looked to the others one by one. They turned away uncertain, unwilling to argue but unwilling to fight. Tahran, fine, Vekar said. But if the elders refuse, he's your burden. You will answer for it. I will. They carried him on a makeshift sled woven from vines and branches 3 hours. Through heat and mist, the human drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words they could not understand. Names, pleas, orders. They meant nothing to the Zalvi, except that they proved his mind was still burning at the edge of the village. The watchers blew warning horns and spears were raised at the sight of something human, but Tahran stood before them, arms open, and spoke with the authority of one who had fought in the fire climb and bathed in the ash of the storm. He is under my protection. He is not a threat, he is in pain, and he asked for help. They brought him not to the elder hut, but to the old cave outside the eastern ridge, where no eyes but the stars watched over the wounded Tahran, and 2 others stayed with him, cleaned. His wounds ground herbs for the fever, and covered his broken arm in a splint carved from the roots of a gnarled fire tree. He slept for days. When he awoke, it was night. The fire was low, and Tahran sat beside it, carving a whistle from bone. The human stirred, groaned, and tried to sit up, but fell back with a wince. Tahran turned, eyes sharp but calm, and offered water in a carved wooden bowl. You are safe for now, but speak little. The others do not agree with my choice. The human took the water hand. Shaking, drank, then rasped out. Names Cole Varin. Tahran nodded. Tahran, son of Elvek, third of the fire hunt. Cole leaned back, eyes scanning the cave, then fixed on Tahran again. You saved me. Why? Because no one else would. The days turned into a rhythm, healing and silence, and slow learning. Tahran began to understand some of Cole's words, and Cole picked up pieces of the Zalvi tongue they spoke in gestures, half-formed phrases shared food. Cole once laughed for a whole minute when Tahran tried to explain the concept of ritual bathing with fire ash and fermented bark in return. Cole showed him pieces of his broken communicator, taught them how to filter water using heat and stone, and even how to make a rudimentary brace for a village elder's twisted leg using scrap from the pod. He told them of space and stars of great ships and orbital cities of wars that burned across sectors, and of quiet places where nothing moved but time. He spoke rarely of Earth, only once when he sat beneath the twin moons and stared into the dark. "It's blue," he said after a long silence. "The oceans wrap the world, and the wind smells like salt and pine. There's music in the air, not noise, not machines, just the kind that comes from living." Tahran listened and did not speak, and afterward he gave Cole a small pendant carved from rootstone. It bore the mark of the storm hunter, a symbol of surviving what should have killed you. Weeks passed. Cole stood again, walked with a limp, but with strength in his steps. His arm healed, though not perfectly, and he spent his days helping where he could. Then one day the sky roared and the village froze. Federation beacon thundered across the ridge. Rescue had come not for them, but for Cole. He looked at Tahran, then at the people who had watched him with cautious hope and silent fear. He stepped forward and placed something in Tahran's hand, a small silver badge with a cracked edge marked with numbers and symbols. "If you ever need me, ever," he said, "you send this signal and I will come no matter what." No matter when. Tahran looked down at the token, then at Cole and nodded once, slow and solemn. "We do not forget." The ship came down clean and fast. Men in armor stepped out, weapons ready but lowered as Cole spoke to them. He turned only once as he boarded the ramp, met Tahran's gaze and held it. Then he was gone. The jungle closed behind the trail of fire. The badge was warm in Tahran's hand, and the sky above was silent again. But something had changed beneath it, something vast and quiet and waiting. The oath had been made. The flames reached the top of the canopy, long before the screams stopped and the smoke rolled down into the valley, thick and oily, choking birds from the sky and sending the ground beasts into a stampede that trampled roots and corpses alike. Tahran stood at the edge of the ridge, one hand clenched around the hilt of his father's bone dagger, the other pressed to his side where blood seeped through torn leather. Below him, his village burned. He had seen war before, had fought syndicate raiders on the western cliffs and watched metal drones carve patterns of death into stone. But this was different. This was methodical. This was cleansing. They had come with machines in the night, armored crawlers and smokewalkers, their insignias painted in blood-red and corporate gold, their orders clear: remove the Zalvi presence, erase the settlements, extract the minerals with no resistance. Resistance had come anyway. Tahran's people had fought, not because they believed they would win, but because the soil held their ancestors, and the air held their names. To flee was to vanish completely, and that they would not do. His brother Kale had held the north gate with a scavenged beam rifle until it overheated and burst in his hands. Tahran had found what was left of him near the pyres, nothing but charred ribs and half a pendant. Now only 24 of them remained hiding in tunnels under the old temple, barely fed, barely breathing. The others gone lost to fire or marched into syndicate work. Camps along the extraction lines where screams echoed day and night. Tahran limped back through the brush one step at a time, every bone aching, every breath pulling fire into his chest. The badge was still tied around his neck, cold against his skin, a weight heavier than any weapon. Some said it was foolish to believe that a human would remember a promise made across fire and blood. Some whispered that Tahran had dreamed the whole thing, that no such man had ever existed, that humans were myths and ghosts and old cautionary tales. But Tahran knew better. He remembered the cave and the broken man, the way Cole had bled and laughed and healed, and the words he had spoken before leaving. "You send this signal, and I will come." He reached the outer ruin of the syndicate relay station. As night fell, a twisted tower of blackened steel and fractured antenna hidden beneath the cliffs. The guards had grown lazy. No one had attacked in weeks. They believed the Zalvi, broken and leaderless. Tahran waited for the moon to vanish behind cloud, then slipped through the ruined vent tunnel, crawling on his belly, through ash and glass. every breath, silent, every movement, slow and deliberate. He reached the inner chamber without alarm, bones cracking underfoot, broken chairs, shattered monitors. Only one terminal still flickered faint blue lines of code, dancing across a shattered screen held together with wire and solder. He pulled the badge from his neck, inserted it into the makeshift port he had built. Weeks ago, before the second raid, before Cale's last scream, he typed slowly the words shaky and imprecise. He did not know human language, but he knew the code Cole had taught him 15 years ago, the shape of the word carved into his memory, like a scar oath. The signal burst into space, thin and dirty and weak. It would take time, maybe days, maybe longer. Maybe it would never arrive, but he had done it. He had kept his promise and placed his hope into the void where it could burn or bloom. Heard the footsteps too late, heavy and armored, and sure the door behind him hissed open and a beam of yellow light swept across the chamber. Tahran stood slowly, turning his face. Calm, his shoulders squared, a syndicate enforcer stepped into view, helmeted and wrapped in steel, his shock baton humming with blue fire. "What do we have here?" he said. Voice filtered through metal. A little rodent tapping on stolen tech. Tahran said nothing. The badge had fallen to the floor, its gleam dulled by dust. The enforcer kicked it aside and slammed the baton into Tahran's ribs. Lightning exploded in his chest, and he collapsed to one knee. "You don't get to speak," he said. "Not anymore. Your kind had your chance now. You crawl and beg until we scrape you." Into the dirt, Tahran spat blood onto the man's boots and smiled a slow, broken smile. "We do not beg." The baton came down again and the dark swallowed him whole. He awoke in chains, iron cuffs around his wrists and ankles, caged like an animal in the heart of the syndicate compound beyond the hills, where the jungle had been stripped bare, and the sky was always red with smoke. Dozens of Zalvi were held there, heads shaved, backs scarred, their eyes empty. Tahran joined them in silence, his injuries healing in crooked lines. No one spoke of hope, not anymore. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time stretched and snapped. The air grew hotter, the guards grew crueler. Tahran watched the sky every night for a flicker, for a burn, for a shape in the clouds that did not belong. Nothing came. He stopped looking. One night the enforcer from the tower returned, stood outside his cage, and leaned close enough for the stink of him to crawl into Tahran's nose. "You called for help, didn't you? Send some little message?" Into the dark. He laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "They're not coming. Your little ghost doesn't care." Tahran closed his eyes and let silence answer. When the explosion came, it was not fire that fell, but light, white and blue and gold. The sky screamed. Open, and machines rained from it, but they bore no syndicate mark. They bore wings of steel and hulls of obsidian, the shape of ships made not for transport or profit, but war. The guards ran shouting alarms as the outer gates shattered, and the sky wept. Thunder. Tahran stood in the chaos, blood running down his face, one hand still clutching the chain that bound him. The cage door had been blown open by the shockwave. The others stared at him as though he had spoken the storm into being. A voice echoed through the sky, low and clear and human. "This is Admiral Cole Varren of the Terran Federation. Your occupation ends now." Tahran smiled, then not with triumph, but with something deeper, something older. He remembered a fire in a cave and a promise, carved in pain, and now the sky had answered. The story was not over. The world cracked beneath the boots of men who had crossed galaxies to keep a promise, and Cole stood at the edge of the burning wreckage, eyes fixed on the prison that had once caged his friend. Dust clung to his uniform. Blood marked the edge of his knuckles, and the breath in his chest came sharp and hard with each heartbeat. But he did not move until he saw him. Tahran emerged through the smoke chains hanging from his wrists, eyes hollow, body bent but unbroken. Cole moved, then fast past. The medical teams passed the rubble, past the stunned prisoners, and laid a hand on Tahran's shoulder. "You kept it." Tahran looked at him with the weight of 1,000 dead behind his stare and nodded once. "They burned our homes, they took our sons, they caged us like animals. And now they run." Cole looked toward the hills where syndicate ships lay torn and burning, the remnants of a force that had never expected resistance, let alone justice. He gestured to a medic behind him, but Tahran waved the man off and walked alone toward the center of what had once been the courtyard. He spoke to his people, then voice loud, but even he named the dead with no pause. He listed the crimes with no hate, only memory. He reminded them of the old ways, and then of the new that had come in fire and fallen. Steelcoal watched in silence, a strange tightness pulling in his throat. He had seen revolutions and planetary uprisings. He had led orbital sieges and ground wars, but nothing struck him quite like the sight of Tahran standing barefoot among the ashes of his home and telling his people to stand. Later in the command tent, Cole sat across from Tahran, who had been cleaned and bandaged, his voice quieter now, but no less steady. "You brought a fleet, you." "Send to Cole." Not many would have answered. "I'm not many." Tahran allowed a breath that almost became a laugh, then looked away toward the map that displayed the valley, now clear of hostiles, but surrounded by syndicate holdings. "They'll come back," Cole leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "They might, but they won't find what they expect." "We're not staying." Cole's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You brought fire, but not roots. We still bleed, we still mourn. We must bury, not just the dead, but the fear we have lived under for decades, and we must do it ourselves. You think they will let you rebuild? They don't need to let us. They need to learn that we will do it anyway." Cole smiled slightly and nodded, slow and respectful. "Then we give them something to remember." For 3 days the Federation fleet remained above the region, not as conquerors, but as shield and witness repair drones rebuilt what they could. Engineers distributed supplies while Marines patrolled the outer ridges. To hold off scavengers, Cole spent the nights in the open air, his old wounds throbbing in the cold and his thoughts wrapped around things he had never said to anyone, not even Tehran. He had returned out of loyalty. Yes, but also guilt. The kind that never faded, only shifted weight. A piece of him had died the day he left Tehran on that world. The Federation had told him never to look back, and yet for 15 years he had carried the badge in his uniform, as if waiting for an excuse to defy the silence. Now he had, and it felt like breathing again for the first time in years. On the 4th morning, Tahran approached, holding a length of carved wood in his hands, a new staff marked with both the sigil of the Storm Hunter and something else. A human star etched beside it. "You once said Earth was blue, that the wind sang and the oceans wrapped it like a cloak." Cole nodded, eyes distant. "You should return to it." Tahran shook his head. "I have no need for stories. I have work and memory and fire." He placed the staff in Cole's hands. "But if ever you forget why you came, remember that we are not just survivors. We are the answer to a promise." Cole looked at the staff, then at the man who had once dragged him from death with nothing but courage and rootstone splints, and realized he was staring at something more than a friend. He was staring at the shape of what resistance looked like when carved in blood and silence. The final departure was not marked with ceremony, only a nod between men who had seen each other through both beginning and end. The fleet rose from the atmosphere engines quiet as shadows and left Revelis 3 in the hands of those who had earned it with bone and fire. In the days that followed, reports of Federation aggression leaked through syndicate channels. They whispered of a human officer who defied orders of a fleet that changed course without approval, of a planet that was defended not for resources or politics, but for a single name transmitted across. Fractured code. Cole's superiors demanded explanation. His allies warned him of political fallout. His enemies smiled and waited for punishment. None came. Instead, other worlds began to send their own signals, each one a variation of that same broken word oath, and Cole began to see a future he had not expected, a future built not on treaties, but on memory. The story was not over. The stars pulsed overhead like ancient eyes watching, as Cole stood at the edge of the ruined platform, boots set, wide hands clasped behind his back, wind pushing through the broken spires of the syndicate fortress, now converted into a command post. He had not slept in 2 days, had not closed his eyes without hearing the names, the fire, the silence. And through it all, one voice remained clearer than the rest. "You sent the call and I came." It had not ended there. Not really, because syndicate forces had not simply vanished. They had regrouped, scattered across 6 systems, rallying under a new directive to strike not through conquest, but through fear, assassinations, sabotage, fleet-wide corruption, and whispers that the Federation had grown weak, too soft to finish what they started. Cole had watched admirals argue in closed chambers, senators posture and withdraw fleets from the edge of known space, while colonies were left to hold with little more than pride and memory. He had returned to Earth once to stand before the High Council, not in chains as some predicted, but in full uniform, his voice even, and his eyes tired. He had told them of Revelis, 3 of the prisons of the graveyards of children's bones buried under stolen ground, and of a man who had taught him that oaths made in silence scream louder than politics. They had listened, and then they had turned away. So he turned too and left Earth behind a second time, this time by choice, and without regret. Tahran had rebuilt his world slowly, not with steel but with stone and soil, and will his people return from the camps, from the woods, from the mines, their hands blistered and their hearts slow to trust, but they returned because the stars had bled for them, and they knew the shape of resistance now. Cole had watched from orbit, watched as temples rose and towers fell, and the broken flags of their past were burned with no mourning, only defiance. He had not landed since the day of the departure, though. Messages passed between them, brief and sharp, carrying strategy warnings and sometimes only silence. That meant I am still alive and fighting. But now he was here again, not for reunion, but because Tahran had called, not with a signal, but with a ship, drifting near Federation space, riddled with syndicate bullet patterns. Its crew dead, its black box intact, and a name etched into its core storm. Hunter Cole had known then that it was not just a retaliation, it was a declaration they were hunting. Symbols, and Tahran was more than that. He was the memory of failure, and they meant to erase him. The operation was not sanctioned. The fleet that followed Cole was smaller, faster, drawn from veterans and loyalists, men who had followed him through flames and courts alike. He did not ask for permission because he no longer believed in asking. When they arrived, Revelis 3 was burning again. This time not from surface raids, but from above. Syndicate cruisers swarmed the sky, their orbital cannons, reducing outer villages to craters and the atmosphere to ash. Cole gave no order to retreat. Instead, his fleet broke formation and dove like knives into the black, their hulls glinting like old vengeance reborn. He landed before the fighting ended, because he knew Tahran would be where the smoke was thickest, where the ground turned red and the wind stank of metal. He found him on the southern ridge alone, atop a broken crawler rifle in one hand, blade in the other, face streaked with soot and blood, but eyes sharp as ever. Cole said nothing as he stepped beside him, only nodded and raised his own weapon. You took your time. Traffic was hell. They stood together as a new wave came. Syndicate mechs stomping through the trees, flanked by mercenaries. With no insignia and too many teeth, Cole fired once a clean bolt through a mech's visor, then dropped low as a blast tore through the sky behind them. Tahran moved like wind and weight, silent, until impact, his blade cutting through armor like it remembered what pain was and wanted it repaid. They fought as if years had not passed, as if the cave and the fire were yesterday, as if the screams in the jungle still echoed in their chests, and the names of the lost were on every swing around them. The valley trembled. Federation dropships screamed across the skyline, deploying fire teams and turrets, while syndicate forces buckled under coordinated strikes. But it was not enough, because from the clouds came a ship unlike the rest, blacker than shadow and shaped like a predator, with wings stretched wide, and a cannon glowing from its underbelly. Cole saw it first, and cursed. That's not a cruiser. Tahran spat blood and looked up. No, it's a judgment. The cannon charged light, growing to a blinding white, the kind that did not cleanse but unmake. Cole's comms flared with warnings. Calls to fall back, please for cover. He did not move. Instead, he looked at Tahran and knew, we have 30 seconds. Less. The hill was high, the platform near, the base damaged beyond recognition. But Cole pointed anyway toward the relay tower Tahran had once used. So long ago. Can we reroute the cannon signal, scramble the lock? Maybe. Then let's go. They ran with lungs full of fire and feet slick with blood, pushing through ash and wreckage, while the sky counted down above them. Cole shot a drone from the air and vaulted over a crater. Tahran kicked open the shattered door of the relay and began tearing at the interface without waiting for boot sequences or permissions. The system flickered and screamed error messages, but Tahran worked through them with instinct and memory, hot sparks leaping across his fingers. The cannon flared brighter now, a sun being born for no reason but death. Cole watched it. Pulse and knew there would be no escape. Now Tehran slammed the final key and the tower screamed a new signal straight into the warship's targeting core, not to destroy, not to misfire, but to delay, to confuse, to redirect. Even for a moment, it was. Enough? The cannon fired wide, the beam tearing across the sky, harmlessly scorching a mountainside and shattering syndicate formations in the valley below. Cole laughed, once wild and short. "You crazy bastard." Tehran slumped against the terminal blood, seeping from a wound Cole had not seen. "They'll try again, let them. They will bring more. Then so will we." Cole stepped forward and caught him before he fell fully the weight. Familiar not just in muscle but in meaning, and he set him gently against the wall, hand pressed to his side. Tehran's voice was thin now but steady. "You kept the promise again. You keep making it worth keeping." Outside the sky burned, not in defeat, but in resistance, and the fleet above held formation like a wall of memory and fire, and Cole knew that this time the syndicate would not forget. He leaned close, voice low but sure. "You rest now, I'll hold the line." Tehran closed his eyes and said nothing, but the war was not over, and neither were they.